going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Kings Court podcast presented to you by SacktownRoyalty.com and sponsored by RateCrushers.com. Everyone go to RateCrushers.com if you're looking for any type of insurance, motorcycle, car, leisure, renter's insurance. These brokers over at Rate Crushers have you covered and beating the competitors up to 35%. As you can tell by the introduction to this video, the cover page of this video, we have a very special guest making his Kings Court debut, host of the If You Don't Like That podcast, the one and only Grant Napear. Grant, how you doing?
I'm good, Vince. Thanks for having me on. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm very excited to have you on. And like I told you to start the show, I'm so happy that I can say that I've had both now Jerry Reynolds and Grant Napear, the former voices of the Sacramento Kings, on this show. It's a true honor to have you on.
Well, thank you. I love doing shows with Jerry, too. As a matter of fact, on my YouTube channel, If You Don't Like That with Grant Napear, Jerry will be on with me today at 3 o'clock Pacific, and we have a blast. So Jerry's the best. I mean, you know that. Everyone knows Jerry's a Sacramento legend, and I'm happy that you had him on.
Yeah, man. Everyone go subscribe over there to the If You Don't Like That YouTube channel podcast. Go hippity hop and go listen to Jerry Reynolds on Grant Napier's show over there. Grant,
Yep.
you know, I don't think I'd be doing this show any justice if I didn't just ask you just how have you been since your time away from the Kings, doing your own podcast, joining the Jim Rome show and being a host over there? What's life been like post Kings?
It's been a lot different, Vince. That's for sure. I mean, my life's pretty much been the same for, 32 years when I started doing the games back in 1988. And, every year it was pretty much the same, beginning in October until the end of the season. You were very regimented. You were on a tight schedule. You did a lot of traveling. And it's been an adjustment. It's now been a little over 2 years. I miss it. I miss the fans more than anything. And that's why I started my podcast. And more importantly, I started doing some live shows so that I could interact with the fans. That's the one thing that I probably miss more than anything is interacting with the fans. I had a talk show in Sacramento for 26 years and talked to the fans every day for 3 and 4 hours. And I miss that. And so the internet is a great thing. It's a great opportunity to reconnect with the fans. But life's been different, but you adjust, you move on. Nobody's going to feel sorry for you, although there are people that feel sorry for me. But my point is, I could walk around with my head down and be dejected and go, gee, now what? But you got to pick yourself up and you got to move on. And that's what I've done.
So you bring up that podcast, if you don't like that podcast, and
Yeah.
like you said, the Grant Napear show that you hosted for many years out here in Sacramento. I am a former listener of that show as well. I would even say that you were one of the people that inspired me to go after journalism and go after doing the podcasting thing before podcasts were even a thing. So I do applaud you for that. But what is your podcast about? Is it more just like the Grant Napear show? Did you kind of take a different view of it all and kind of doing more of just takes here and there? Like, how long is each episode? Kind of give me your idea of what your show is.
I have a mix of interviews with guests, and then I do commentary. So, I've been very blessed. I've had some great guests on. Charles Barkley was the first guest that I had on my podcast when I started back in October of 2020. I've had Dusty Baker on. I've had pretty much all of the network announcers on my show, like Mike Breen, Kevin Harlan, Ian Eagle. But I've also had a lot of former athletes. I've had Will Clark on my show. I've had Hall of Famer Brian Urlacher, Robbie Gould, the kicker of the 49ers. I mean, I've also had a lot of people that have faced adversity, such as Tom Brenneman, who was the NFL on Fox announcer and the TV voice of the Cincinnati Reds. And we talked about what he went through when he made a homophobic slur on what was a hot mic during a Cincinnati Reds game. And then I do commentary, Vince. I talk about what I think are important issues, hypocrisies, double standards facing our sports world. And I think that right now you're seeing it in the NBA with Kyrie Irving and the league's refusal to suspend or fine him. I thought TNT did a fabulous job calling out the commissioner, calling out the NBA, calling out the Nets. I thought Charles Barkley was spot on. I thought Reggie Miller and his analysis was spot on. He called the players in the NBA crickets, and he's absolutely right. When it comes to anti-Semitic comments, for whatever reason, people want to remain silent unless people are Jewish. Well, I don't understand that. Hate is hate. Whether you're against Asians or Muslims or Jewish people or black people or whatever the case may be. Hate is hate. And I always like to quote Mitch Albom, who is a renowned writer for the Detroit Free Press and has written many books. And after Deshaun Jackson of the Philadelphia Eagles 2 years ago made anti-Semitic comments, Mitch wrote a great column on that because there wasn't enough outcry. There weren't enough people speaking up. And he said, you cannot be selective with your noise, not against hate. Think about that. You cannot be selective with your noise, not against hate. And I thought Reggie Miller was spot on. There are too many people that are selective with their noise. Hate is hate. And I don't know why so many people have a difficult time, having their voices heard, like LeBron James. LeBron only speaks out if it involves racism. Where's LeBron James condemning, anti-Semitic remarks? And, I can go on and on. He's not the only one. So, I talk about that on my live shows and I talk about that on my podcast because I think they are really important topics that we all need to look in the mirror and say, you know what, we need to do a better job as a society.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you bring that up because I wanted to ask you this a little bit later in the show, but you're bringing it up so early now. I might as well just ask you now. Did you think it was pretty interesting that Kyrie Irving, who is the VP of the Basketball Players Association, they waited, I feel, a little too long to release a statement addressing his remarks about the anti-Semitic, I can't even pronounce the word, but the promotion of that video?
Um, I think the NBA has erred a lot over these type of issues. For instance, this past summer, Draymond Green used a racial slur towards Kendrick Perkins, former NBA player and now of ESPN. The NBA didn't put out a statement. The NBA didn't fine Draymond Green. They didn't suspend him. The Warriors did nothing. And then a couple of days later, Draymond, said that he apologized. And after speaking privately with Joe Dumars and Adam Silver, he realized what he said was wrong. But again, there's a double standard. There's a hypocrisy in this league. Do I think the NBA waited too long? I think if the NBA wants to come out and make a statement the way they did about anti-Semitic comments and about hate speech and actions involving hate, they should have mentioned Kyrie Irving by name. They didn't. I just think the NBA right now is so afraid to condemn any of their players. I think it's so unfortunate. And I think the NBA is losing a lot of credibility. And I'll tell you, when you have a multi-billion, not million, a multi-billion-dollar partner of the NBA like TNT, and you have Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal rip the NBA and rip the commissioner, and that is getting a lot of press across this country, and then you have Reggie Miller calling the players of the NBA crickets, that's damaging to the NBA. And Adam Silver cannot be sitting in his office and saying, gee, everything is just fine. I think the commissioner needs to take a more stringent stance when his players step out of line instead of being a puppet. I think Adam Silver's turned into a puppet, and I think it's really unfortunate for the NBA, which is a great, great league.
Grant Napear of the If You Don't Like That podcast and former play-by-play announcer here for the Sacramento Kings joins the Kings Court podcast. Again, this show is brought to you by SacktownRoyalty.com and sponsored by RateCrushers.com. Look, Grant, we can continue harping on the NBA and the issues that it currently has, but here on this show we try to focus mainly on the Sacramento Kings, and I think now would be a great time more than ever to start diving into that. And look, the Kings have won 2 games back to back with a very tough matchup once again against the Miami Heat tonight, Wednesday. What has been your overall thoughts on the Kings thus far, with De'Aaron Fox averaging close to 25 points per game, Sabonis being right there around 15 points per game? What are your thoughts on Mike Brown and the Kings and their play on the floor thus far this season?
Very inconsistent, very poor defense. We hear Mike Brown being a defensive coach. Then training camp starts, and all we hear about is defense, defense, defense. And in the first game against Portland, they allowed the Blazers to score more than 30 points in 3 of the 4 quarters. So I look at the Kings in the first 6 games as very inconsistent, look really good at times, look really bad at times. And that to me is alarming. They don't have a rim protector. You see Sabonis getting in foul trouble. They're asking him to do something that I don't think he is capable of doing. The Kings, I think, get a break tonight, even though De'Aaron Fox will not be playing. Miami played last night and beat Golden State. And the Heat have not really been playing well this year. And the Kings, of course, just beat them a couple of days ago, they almost blew a huge lead of 71-49 at the break and held on to win. But the Kings need more consistency. Winning 2 games in a row is fine, but it's how you're playing. And, Charlotte is a perfect example on Monday night. The Kings were down by 15 points at the half, allowed over, 64 to 49 or 60, whatever the case was, but they were down big and they had a big third quarter. So I'm a little alarmed, Vince, with the inconsistencies that I'm seeing from the Kings, not game to game, but really quarter to quarter. And that has to get better if this team is really going to evolve.
Yeah, I agree. I think the biggest disappointment that I've seen is they talk so much about improving themselves defensively, and it seemed they took a self-reflection in a lot of their comments that they made throughout the offseason on each player looking at themselves and the
Yep.
and the small things that they need to get better at. But we haven't necessarily seen that on the court just yet. I just recently
Nope.
wrote a piece for Sacktown Royalty saying that, Mike Brown comes in with a lot of core values that he wants to see offensively, and let alone the teachings that he wants to bring defensively. And by watching a lot of his coaching seminars that he did just a couple of years ago as an assistant coach for the Golden State Warriors. And in that, a lot of it stated that, it takes time for players to learn this system. And because a lot of it is because they want the players to make instinctual decisions. Do you think that that learning curve is going to be something that takes a full season to learn? Maybe it's still just game by game. What are your thoughts when you hear comments like that from Mike Brown?
I go, look at the Utah Jazz. They've got a new team, they've got a new coach. Has it taken them time? I think that that's more of an excuse than anything. Now, I understand it's not a light switch. We can just turn it on and off, meaning that it does take some time. And maybe some teams take longer than others, but the Kings are a veteran team. De'Aaron's in his 6th year. Kevin Herter, who's been excellent, is a veteran. Harrison Barnes has been in the league a long time. Sabonis is a 2-time All-Star. You have the rookie Keegan Murray, who is the real freaking deal. But so I think we make a little too much out of that. I think we, as Sacramento Kings fans, are always looking for excuses to justify our belief in the team, if that makes sense. I think
Yeah, it
sometimes
does.
we are afraid to acknowledge what the reality and the truth is because we want to make ourselves feel better. Like when the Kings were 0-4, I was getting a lot of messages from people. Well, gee, look at the Pelicans last year. They started off horribly and they made the playoffs. And so everything's going to be fine. And I think Kings fans, because of so many years of futility and 16 years of not having a 500 season, I think sometimes they try to pacify themselves by saying, well, it's going to be okay. It's new. You have a new coach. But again, I use the Utah Jazz as a perfect example. They're the same as Sacramento, are they not? They got rid of 2 All-Stars. I shouldn't say they got rid of. They made 2 bold trades. Everything is new. And look at how well they're playing. So I always look at really what's going on with the Kings and their players. Are they all young players? That would then tell me, okay, it's going to take a little more time. But you know what, Vince? They're not young players. This is a veteran team now. And their inconsistencies from quarter to quarter to me are somewhat alarming. Not like where I'm ready to jump off the bridge, but it's a little alarming, to be honest with you.
Let me throw up the counter side in terms of what fans like to tell me, because I'm on the same boat as you, where it's like I think it's something that you need to keep your eye on. It's something that, it's not like you said, I'm not jumping off the boat. I'm not thinking that I'm ready to give up on the season or anything like that, but it is something that you're gonna want to look at and say, hey, these things need to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. But here's the counter to what most Kings fans like to say is, how much do you look at the strength of schedule to start these first 6 games and the opponents that they face, and along with, the coaching changes that these players have had to see over the years, like a De'Aaron Fox, and this being arguably the best coach he's had in his NBA tenure. What do you say to comments like that?
I don't think it's the best coach that he's had in his tenure. That's just my opinion. But we're going to find out. That's why you play the games. As far as the schedule, everybody they lost to the LA Clippers without Kawhi Leonard and John Wall. The Clippers have really struggled. Are they really the team that we thought they were going to be? I mean, I'm just throwing that out there. So Memphis is really good, although they just lost back-to-back games to Utah, but they didn't have Morant playing. We know Golden State is the defending champs, but look at Golden State's record right now. What are they, 3-5 after losing last night to Miami? And the Kings gave up 89 points in the first half. So Is their schedule really as difficult as we make it out to be? I mean, didn't most people before the season began look at the rosters of the Portland Trailblazers and the Kings and said the Kings have the better roster and they'll finish ahead of Portland, and that's one of the teams that will probably not make in the top 10? Yeah, Portland's off to a good start, but again, I think again, Vince, that maybe we're making too much out of this. Say, well, you played the number one seed in Miami and you beat them. Well, Miami has really struggled coming out of the gate. So, I don't really go by last year as much. Look at this year. Look at San Antonio right now. Look at Utah right now and the changes they've made. Look at the Portland Trailblazers. All right. So if you take a look at San Antonio and Portland, two teams that I would say, Vince, at the beginning of this season, most Kings fans said, oh, the Kings are better than them. They're going to finish ahead of them. Look at how bad San Antonio was last year. They finished 10th, and then they lost their first game in the play-in, and Portland wasn't even in it. And now all of a sudden, those two teams look like they're going to have really good seasons. So I don't really look at last year. I look at this year. And again, it's only we're less than 2 weeks, or we're 2 weeks into the NBA season. And there were certain teams that we thought were going to be really, really good that right now don't look to be very good. And I just mentioned some of those teams. So I think you need 20 to 25 games, Vince. I've always used that as a barometer. I like to look at a 20 to 25 games. And I think by then you get a really good read on whether a team is good, so-so, or bad. And then after 20 or 25 games, you can't really talk about, well, they had a tough schedule. They didn't have a tough schedule. By then, you've played both the good and the bad. And we then find out whether your team is worthy of being a playoff team or not. We're not there yet after 6 games.
Do you think it's very interesting that after 6 games, the rotation for Mike Brown has been so big? Like in terms of how many players they're putting on the floor. One game you're going to see Trey Lyles for 12 minutes. The next you're going to see
Yep.
Chimezie Metu for 15. What has been your thoughts on Mike Brown's rotation thus far?
He's searching and he's rewarding players that are excelling in practice. And I think he mentioned that in a post-game press conference. I want to say after their fourth loss of the season, if I'm not mistaken, that he's using players uh, based on giving them a chance. He's still trying to find his best 9 or 10 man rotation. I don't think he has it down yet. I think he probably has a good idea, but he made it very clear at the beginning of his tenure here that you were going to have to earn minutes. And I think he's living up to what he said. And I don't have a problem with that right now. That will evolve. And I think within 5 more games, 8 more games, I think you'll see a pretty consistent rotation from Mike Brown.
Speaking of the rotation, let's go ahead and start looking at individual players here, Grant, because I think it's been very. I mean, we got to see a nice game from him against Charlotte, having a season high, but I think it's
Yep.
been very alarming to see the minutes or their lack thereof minutes for Davion Mitchell. What has been your thoughts on Davion thus far?
He was very slow coming out of the block. But again, I look at how he played last year when De'Aaron Fox missed the last couple of weeks, and he was outstanding. So what that tells me is I already know that he can play in this league. Maybe you call it a slump. Maybe he was a guy that had to get accustomed to Mike Brown. Again, he's only in his second year. I think tonight is a really big game for him to see if he can build on what he did on Monday. And I'm going to say this, Vince, and don't say well, you can call me crazy. I've had a lot of people call me worse. If De'Aaron Fox misses a couple of games and Davion Mitchell plays the way he did Monday night during these games, you and I both know what the narrative is going to be. All right. Fox is expendable. If you remember, last February, the vast majority of Kings fans wanted Fox traded instead of Halliburton. And the same thing will happen if Davion Mitchell plays these next several games in the absence of Fox. And again, I don't know how many games De'Aaron's going to miss. But if Mitchell plays the way he did on Monday night, that's what you're going to be dealing with on your podcast and your website. I can absolutely guarantee you. So do I think Davion Mitchell's a better player than De'Aaron Fox? No, I don't. But what I am saying is this is a bottom line business. You either win or you lose. And if Mitchell steps into the starting point guard role while Fox is dealing with his knee injury and this team starts winning, that is what is going to be the talk in Sacramento. You just watch.
Especially if when Fox comes back and they go on like a 2-3 game skid.
Yep,
that'll draw up the narrative like it's the same thing that you're hearing about with Cooper Rush and Dak Prescott. Like, hey, do you go
absolutely.
away? You know what I mean? So you're gonna definitely see things like
Hmm.
that. And I agree with you. I think that Davion has had this storyline of everyone being excited to see his minutes, especially after what happened last season. But again, there was
Hmm.
also that little clip that happened when the Kings PR team put out that the inside the locker room or whatever, where Mike Brown's kind of reaping into him during the practice at training camp. And a lot of people were then kind of giving him the side eye, like, oh, are we not going to see Davion too much? His minutes haven't been there. And then we got to see the explosion. So I agree with you. I think this game against the Gabe Vincent, Tyler Hero, and possibly a Kyle Lowry,
Yep.
seeing where he is this season will be huge. Let's go ahead and move on now to Domantas Sabonis. You brought him up a little bit earlier. The foul trouble has been very
Yep.
alarming to see from him. It's been a bit of a disappointing start to this season. How big of a role does he have to play in the absence of De'Aaron Fox?
Well, I'll tell you, Jerry Reynolds made a very interesting comment when I had him on last week on my YouTube live show. He thinks Mike Brown is misusing Sabonis. He thinks he's playing him out of position, that he needs to be closer in the high post near the elbow and utilize his passing and everything else that he does. I thought it was very, very interesting that Jerry thought that Mike Brown was not using Sabonis properly. Listen, in order for Sabonis to be effective, let's face it, I mean, he's got to cut down on his usage of fouls. But based on how Mike Brown has the lineup, Sabonis is not a rim protector. He's never been a really good defensive player. I think they're asking him to do things that are outside of his comfort zone. I mean, Sabonis is a two-time All-Star. That's not a fluke. You don't become an All-Star twice at his age because of a fluke. All right. He's good. He's really good. And he needs to start playing better for this team to continue to elevate themselves in the Western Conference standings. So, again, I thought that was a very interesting comment that Jerry made, that he feels, again, that he's being misused, that his talents are being misused by Mike Brown.
Yeah, I find that Mike Brown's offense is not too far away from what we've already been seeing previous coaches try to implement here in Sacramento. A lot of pace, a lot of push the ball, space and pace and everything like that. But the thing that we saw work towards the end of last season, once they made this trade to get Sabonis, was the pick and roll, the high pick and roll with
Yep.
De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. And we haven't seen that nearly as much as many anticipated. I definitely thought we were going to see it more. And then on top of that, Mike Brown coming in, I spoke with Coach Nick of B-Ball Breakdown, and me and him both discussed that Mike Brown would probably bring in at least a little bit of the Princeton offense here into Sacramento, seeing a lot more off-ball movement, a lot more off-ball action, more screens, anything. And I don't think we've seen nearly enough of
We
that
haven't.
either. I agree with you. I think the use of Domantas Sabonis has been very unusual to start the season.
Well, and you can see it reflected in his numbers. These aren't Domantas Sabonis numbers. I mean, when you look at his 6 games and you look at the total statistics, that's not what you need from Sabonis. So Mike Brown needs to figure that out. The Kings as a team need to figure that out. You make a very good point about the pick and roll after the trade last year and how well, he and Fox worked. So, these are all things that need to be sorted out in a hurry because yes, I know it's early. I know we just turned the calendar to November. I know there are a hell of a lot of games left, but the West is a unbelievably difficult, balanced conference, and teams that you did not think would be that good appear to be very good. We mentioned Portland, Utah, and San Antonio, in addition to the other teams. I mean, look at right now. I mean, the Warriors and the Mavericks, they're not even among the top 8 teams in the West. So, you better not be. I guess the point I'm trying to make, Vince, is the Kings aren't good enough, in my opinion, to get into a deep hole and climb out of it and be relevant when the calendar hits March 1st. So this needs to be figured out and sorted out in a hurry.
Yeah, I agree. And again, I think I put more of the pressure on De'Aaron Fox's shoulders for the entire season, but I think this is more of a thing that needs to be figured out by Mike Brown. Again, I bring up the
I agree.
the big rotation, the use of Domantas Sabonis, the use of the pick and roll, which was their most effective, offensive set every single time last season once this trade was made. So I think
Yeah.
you have to look more at Mike Brown, but I feel the pressure is going to be on De'Aaron Fox. And I bring him up now. Again, the injuries there, he's day to day with the knee bruise. What has been your thoughts on Fox. Has he been living up to the expectations that many put on him this season, or is the losses that are there really just negate anything that he's really done on the floor?
No, I think for the most part, I would give him a high grade through the first 6 games. And I know in game one, he had 8 turnovers against Portland, and you can't have 8 turnovers as a point guard. I'm a little concerned about his assist to turnover ratio and his lack of assist. I would like to see him, have more assist. I think he's been shooting the ball better, from the line, which is very important. I think his 3-point shot looks better. I guess the issue that I see with De'Aaron Fox, I want to see more of him in the final 4 to 5 minutes of the fourth quarter. Portland is another good example where basically for the final 5 minutes, he didn't score. He didn't get to the line. I need De'Aaron Fox in tight games down the stretch to be noticeable on the floor. And by noticeable, to be that impact guy. The Kings are paying him over $30 million a year. He is off to a really good start. I mean, I'm nitpicking here when I'm making these comments, but he is your franchise point guard. He's the highest paid player on the team. And at the end of games, I want to see more from him. And I think that's fair criticism. End of games, I need to see more from De'Aaron Fox. But all in all, I think the guy's played really, really well. I'd give him a grade of an A through the first week and a half, 2 weeks of the season.
Grant Napear of the If You Don't Like That podcast joins us here on the Kings Court, presented to you by Sacktown Royalty. Right here after this 15-second commercial break from Rate Crushers, I'm going to ask Grant here if he thinks the Kings still have a chance at a playoff spot this season. So right here after the 15-second commercial break, we're going to continue talking with Grant Napear. And we're back live on Twitter Spaces and here on YouTube.com for Sacktown Royalties, the Kings Court podcast, presented to you by RateCrushers.com, joined by the one and only Grant Napear, former play-by-play announcer of the Sacramento Kings for 32 years. Grant, let me ask you this. Throughout your entire tenure here in Sacramento, what was your favorite game to call? What's the game that always sticks in your head where you're like, man, this is the one I've always told my kids about, or this is the ones I'm going to tell my grandkids about?
There are a couple. The 35-point comeback in the third quarter at Chicago and Tyreek Evans' rookie year was one of my favorite games. I did a game on radio with the Kings and the Mavericks in the playoffs, and I look back on that. I think it was maybe the best game I've ever called. Those stick out. And then game 3 in the 95-96 season when the Kings hosted the Sonics, first playoff game at Arco Arena. That was just an amazing, electric, the most incredible atmosphere that I've ever been a part of in any sport anywhere. So those are some of the games that stick out. And I've always reflected back as those being probably, my favorite games. I used to love going to Chicago Stadium when Michael Jordan was at the old stadium before they moved into the United Center. Ray Clay with the introductions, and that place was beyond electric. I mean, that was such a special time to be at that old building when the Bulls won their first 3 championships. But, I've been blessed. I started doing the games in '88 when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was still playing with the Lakers. And so I've really seen some of the greatest players of all time courtside. I announced LeBron James' first ever NBA game, and that was special. But, those are some of the things that I remember.
I've heard this story before of the question I'm about to ask you, but, a lot of new listeners may not have heard this story. Where did you get the "if you don't like that, you don't like Kings basketball," mantra?
Yeah, it just came out one night. I didn't rehearse it. I didn't plan it. Everything I do on the air is spontaneous. And it came out one night, and I had a couple of people go, "Man, that's great. How'd you come up with that?" And it just kind of caught on, and I used it a little bit more, and I saved it for big moments, the big dunks, the big plays. And I mean, it just really caught on. I mean, ESPN started using it on the NBA promos. The NBA started using it on NBA promos. I mean, I'll tell you, one of the things that just blew me away when the Last Dance was aired during the height of the pandemic, or I should say, the beginning of the pandemic. And in one of the episodes, they had a NBA promo, and at the end of the promo on The Last Dance, they had me saying, "If you don't like that, you don't like NBA basketball." So I think it was lucky, Vince. It just came out one night, and it was well received. It stuck with me, and it really became my number one catchphrase.
It really did, and now it's the name of your podcast, and you guys can listen to that on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you guys get your podcast. That if you don't
Yep.
like that podcast, also on YouTube, where later today Grant is going to speak with Jerry Reynolds. So if you like the duo, they're on the sidelines doing the play-by-play. You're going to be able to see them today on YouTube. What time does that podcast start?
3 o'clock Pacific, 3 o'clock with Jerry Reynolds.
Perfect. You guys go over there right now, youtube.com/ if you don't like that on YouTube. Grant, you've got to see this Kings team go from being one of the worst teams in the league to being arguably the best team in the NBA at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And then you were also there for the decline. What is that like, calling games in that way where you're seeing the rise of this team, and then to also be on the side where you're at that peak, and then to see the downfall of it?
Well, first of all, I don't have any problem acknowledging this. When you're the announcer for a team, you become a fan of that team. You love that team. And the losses are painful. I mean, the Robert Ory shot, and I announced that game on radio. Game 4 of the 2002 Western Conference Finals is one of the worst feelings I've ever had, announcing a game. But most announcers will tell you this: it's more enjoyable to announce a winning team than it is a losing team. Now, with that said, live sports is live sports, and you never know what is going to happen. I'll give you an example. So the Kings were having a miserable season, and we went in to play the Warriors in the middle of the winter. Again, the Kings were terrible. And in that game, Klay Thompson scored 37 points in the third quarter. And I've seen a lot of amazing things in 32 years, but I've never seen anything like that. No one's ever seen anything like that. And so you never know what's going to happen. It's like going to a baseball game, and before you realize it, it's the fifth inning and the pitcher hasn't allowed a walk or a hit, and you're there to watch a perfect game. And maybe two bad teams playing that day, but then you're there for history. So the spontaneity of live sporting events always like appealed to me. But what was it like? The late 1990s and the early 2000s with that core and that group. I remember being on the bus going to the arena, and you'd pull up to the arena, and I remember sitting on the team bus going, wow, place is going to be sold out tonight. Everyone's coming to watch the Sacramento Kings, and the Kings know they're going to get off the bus and kick the ass of the team they're playing that night. That was the feeling, that the Kings, you knew, were the better team, and in all likelihood they were going to win. And that feeling was unbelievable to me. And you could just feel it in the locker room and on the bus and during pregame warmups. You were just like, wow, this Kings team is the real deal. It's not a fluke, and they're going to come out and they are going to annihilate their opponent tonight. That was a great, great feeling.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like as a fan growing up as a kid of this team and being so close to the team, I remember there's just being this aura around every one of
Yeah.
the players that were there. And then
Mm-hmm.
on top of that, like you said, I remember them just showing up, and I was so lucky. I raced bicycles as a kid, and I was in LA for a national race, and my dad surprised me with Kings versus Lakers tickets.
Oh, wow.
And I remember, and these were the hottest tickets at the time. This is early 2000. I think it was 2001. And that feeling of seeing the bus arrive, because we got there early, and seeing so
Yeah.
many like Laker fans that are booing the bus because they want this Kings team to
Yeah.
lose. It was just such a surreal. And I'm wearing my Chris Webber jersey, and I'm freaking out. So I find that team and that era, and you being able to see all of that, and then to see where
It's
it
amazing.
turned into. You have a very strong mind when it comes to, and a wise mind when it comes to looking at basketball and looking at talent on the floor. You now see this team here, Grant. Do you see the potential for this team to finally break the drought that is the 16-year playoff drought for Sacramento? Do you think this team and how the West is currently stacked with a few rebuilding teams that this is their year, that this is the shot for them to make the playoffs?
I don't see it. I don't see it. I mean, who are they better than that's ahead of them right now? Give me a team that they're better than. All right. Are they better than Phoenix? No. Are they better than Golden State? No. Are they better than Denver? No. Right. I mean, and the obvious teams. Are they better than Memphis? No. Are they better than Minnesota? No. I mean, are they right now the three teams that I thought the Kings would be better than? Utah, Portland.
Are
Are
they
they
even
better
better
than
than
them?
Oklahoma City right now, Grant?
Well, I was just going to mention them. So if I look at the top 10 teams last year, and by the way, to me, the play-in tournament's not making the playoffs. But if you look at the top 10 teams last year, which at 9 and 10 were New Orleans and San Antonio, Minnesota was 7, and the Clippers are 8. Who are the Kings better than right now of the top 10 teams in the West last year? Who are they better than? They're not better, in my opinion, than any of those teams. And not only that, Portland now appears to be better than they are. San Antonio appears to be better than they are. And I thought San Antonio would be one of the bottom teams in the West. And you just mentioned Oklahoma City. And think about that. They don't even have their top pick this year who got hurt, in Washington playing in a summer league game for all intents and purposes. So to answer your question, I don't see it. I don't see the Kings winning 37, 38, 39, 40 games, which is what it's going to take to get in. I don't see that. I really don't.
What do you have to see for them to turn the page for you, for them to make that transition into
Yep.
becoming that winning team?
I want to know what the Kings' identity is, Vince. What are they? I mean, I don't know what they are from game to game, quarter to quarter. So, in a nutshell, I need consistency from this Kings team. I'm not saying go out and win every night, but compete every night and be in games every night. And by being in games, I'm talking about not allowing these lopsided quarters. Now, I know runs are a part of the NBA, and that's part of the ebb and flow of the game. But we saw this last year. We saw it the year before. We saw it the year before that. This Kings team is just hard to explain, inconsistent. The inconsistency of this team leaves people pulling their hair out of their head. I don't understand how they can be so inconsistent, how they can go from looking so bad, like the first two quarters the other night in Charlotte, to so good after a 15-minute break. I don't understand how they can give up 89 points to the Golden State Warriors in the first half and then pull to within a possession in the fourth quarter. I don't.
Oh, your mic cut out there, Grant. We might have lost Grant there for just a minute, but Grant Napear joining in on the Kings Court podcast presented to you by Sacktown Royalty. A lot of good stuff here. I'm sure he'll be calling right back in. Grant, are you still there? Grant, can you hear
All
me?
right. You can't hear me, and I can't hear
Oh,
you.
I can hear you now. I can
Tell
hear
you what
you
I'm going
now.
to do, Vince. If you can still hear me, I'm going to log off and log back on.
There it is.
And
All right, so Grant's gonna call right back on in. But yeah, I mean, good stuff here. He doesn't view this team as a playoff team just yet, and I find that to be very interesting. Let's go ahead and add him back into the show here. Grant, can you hear me?
all right. Yep, I got you now.
Perfect. I
I
got you
just
as
logged
well.
back
I got
on.
you as
So
well.
I don't know what happened, but I'm glad to be back on with you. So, what I'm saying in a nutshell, I don't know how much of you heard. The inconsistencies of this team is what baffles me. They need to become a more consistent basketball team. And until they get there, I don't see them making the playoffs.
What do you say to someone like Sass here that says the team hasn't even developed their full potential? What do you think their full potential really is? That I think that's what you're trying to say, right? Is what's the identity that you think is their full
Yeah,
potential? Are they're not going to be the 3-point shooting team
I
that is
don't
the
know
Warriors?
I
Are they going to be a Memphis team where
no.
they're I don't see this team being as athletic as Memphis, So, what is developing full potential in your mind, Grant?
It's a great question. A great question. I don't have the answer to that question. You talk about Memphis, they don't even have Jaren Jackson Jr., who's not going to be on the floor until probably, around the first of the year or February 1st. So, they're only going to get better. It starts to me on the defensive end. I don't think you can win in the NBA giving up so many 30-plus point quarters that the Kings have already done in 6 games. I don't think you can win like that. So it's a broken record, but I need to see improvement on the defensive side of the ball. I need to see a Kings team win a game when they don't shoot the ball well because they excel defensively. I'm waiting still to see that. I want to see that.
So Ryan here says that Terrence, and I'm assuming it's Terrence Davis, is underutilized. Do you believe that as well?
It's been a little puzzling. Again, I think Mike Brown is still trying to figure out his rotation. And at times it looks a little odd. I think his substitution pattern at times looks a little odd, but I'm not at practice. You're not at practice. And he's still trying to search for the best rotation. So, yeah, I think you can make that argument that he's been a little underutilized through the first 6 games. Yeah, I think that's fair.
I mean, I don't know if underutilized is the word that I would use, just because, like you said, I don't know if Mike Brown knows if that's his backup wing. And I think the wings are where the biggest question mark is on this Kings team, and figuring out what and who they can put there and how they can utilize that position very well, Grant. But that's going to be our time, guys. I want to thank all of you guys who joined us live on Twitter Spaces. We have quite a few of you guys in there, here on YouTube, and as well as those watching us on SactownRoyalty.com. Grant, before I let you go, first off, let me say thank you. I mean, it's so cool that I've had
my pleasure.
I can say Grant and Jerry Reynolds have been on this show. I as a fan growing up watching you guys, find that to just be awesome.
Thank you.
But before I let you go, let the fans out there know once again, where they can find you online and what they can be expecting from you throughout this entire season and moving forward.
Well, first of all, most of my work is on my website, ifyoudontlikethat.com. I also do a lot of post-game King shows on Listen app. You can download it on your Apple Store. You can download it on the Play Store. You can also go to listenapp.co. But I do a daily show at 4 o'clock Pacific every day. It's basically radio on the internet. And so I'm staying busy, plus my YouTube live channel. And then I put out my podcast on Tuesdays and Fridays as well. I appreciate you having me on. And it was a lot of fun for me, Vince. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, man. And you guys go follow him all on social media platforms, as well as on Twitter at Grant Napear Show. I've been your host today. My name is Vince Miracle. You guys can follow me on all social media platforms of at VM Center. Be sure to go subscribe to and bookmark the website, SactownRoyalty.com. And if you guys are looking for any type of insurance, reach out to our sponsor, RateCrushers.com. This has been the Kings Court Podcast with Grant Napear. And until next time, Sacramento Kings fans, peace.